What if the role that made you famous also broke you? Behind the glamour of old Hollywood and beyond, there exists a darker truth, one that few studios dare to acknowledge. For some actors, a single performance didn't just define their careers, it consumed them. The character clung to them like a shadow, long after the cameras stopped rolling, warping public perception, sabotaging future roles, and in the worst cases, cracking open their sanity. You may think of Norman Bates and recall the chilling face of Anthony Perkins, but did you know he was so typecast, so psychologically fused to that role? He once said he no longer knew where Norman ended and he began. And what about Linda Blair, celebrated for The Exorcist, who found herself haunted not by demons, but by a lifetime of tabloid obsession and casting rejection? This isn't about trivia. This is about the psychic aftermath of performance, the invisible bruises that no award ever heals. Some roles bring prestige, others leave scars. So today, we pull back the velvet curtain and reveal the faces behind the performances, not as stars, but as people who paid a hidden price for becoming someone else. Which actor do you think suffered the most from the role that made them unforgettable? Let's find out. Fact Hassan, Anthony Perkins, trapped in the mind of Norman Bates. When Psycho premiered in 1960, Anthony Perkins delivered a performance so chilling, so quietly unnerving, that it redefined the horror genre. But what no one saw coming, least of all Perkins himself, was that he had just sealed his own fate. Norman Bates became more than a role. It became a prison. Despite being classically trained and capable of charm, wit, and dramatic range, Perkins found doors closing around him, typecast as the disturbed man in every script that followed. Directors didn't want Anthony Perkins. They wanted Norman, again and again. The psychological weight bore down quietly. Friends described him as guarded, even paranoid. Perkins would avoid mirrors and once confessed that the line between himself and Bates blurred with every rewatch of Hitchcock's masterpiece. By the time he returned for Psycho 2 decades later, the industry no longer saw him as a versatile actor, just the face of a sociopath. Was it brilliance or a curse? Can an actor ever truly escape the role that made them iconic? Fact #2. Linda Blair. The real haunting came after. Linda Blair was just 14 when she became Regan McNeil, the levitating, head-spinning child possessed by the devil in The Exorcist. The film earned her Golden Globe acclaim and an Oscar nomination. But what came after was anything but glamorous. Church groups protested her appearances. Interviewers questioned her morality. Tabloids blurred the line between actress and character, suggesting she'd summoned real darkness. Linda was labeled troubled, unstable, even evil. Studios hesitated to cast her in anything outside the horror genre. When she did land roles, they often recycled her trauma, exploiting her past, rather than expanding her future. Worse, the public grew obsessed with her body in the role, a teenage girl caught between religious panic and sexualized spectacle. Blair later said she received death threats, sexual threats, and was shunned by other child actors. Hollywood didn't protect her, it fed on her. Was her performance too good? Or was the audience too willing to believe it was real? Fact #3. Shelley Duvall, shattered by The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is hailed as a cinematic masterpiece, but few films demanded as much real psychological pain from its actors, and no one paid a higher price than Shelley Duvall. To achieve the raw terror Kubrick wanted, he pushed Duvall to the edge. She was isolated from the crew, forced to repeat scenes up to 127 times, and told she was weak or faking it if she cried. The infamous baseball bat scene? Days of rehearsals, screaming, weeping, until her hair began falling out from stress. Kubrick wasn't directing her fear, he was manufacturing it. While Jack Nicholson went on to further acclaim, Duvall's career spiraled. She became reclusive, publicly struggled with mental health, and later gave disturbing interviews where she seemed detached from reality. Many questioned, was it the role, the method, or the system that broke her? And in the end, was Wendy Torrance a performance or a filmed nervous breakdown? Fact #4. Malcolm McDowell, Clockwork Trauma. In A Clockwork Orange, 1971, Malcolm McDowell played Alex DeLarge, a teenage sociopath drenched in ultraviolence and Beethoven. It became his defining role and his personal apocalypse. Director Stanley Kubrick demanded realism at any cost. In the infamous eye clamp scene, McDowell's cornea was actually scratched. He temporarily went blind. But it wasn't the physical pain that lingered, it was what came after. McDowell admitted he started having nightmares, disassociation, and a deep discomfort with how the public began glorifying Alex. The role was meant as critique, but it made him a cult anti-hero. Worse, no one saw Malcolm anymore, just Alex. the British film industry began avoiding him. He was too intense, too dangerous, too iconic. He once said, "That film gave me everything, and then it took everything else away." When a role is meant to repulse but ends up adored, who pays the price for the audience's confusion? Fact #5. Isabelle Adjani, Possession That Never Ended. Possession 1981 is one of the most disturbing films ever made, and for Isabelle Adjani, the trauma didn't stop when the director yelled cut. The film demanded full psychological immersion, screaming fits, violent seizures, prolonged scenes of madness, including the infamous subway miscarriage scene performed in one take. Adjani later revealed it took her years to recover, stating, "It's the only film I've done where I risked losing my soul." Critics praised her performance as beyond acting, almost exorcism. But that praise came with a cost. She was branded too intense for future roles. Directors feared her volatility. The industry couldn't tell if she was brilliant or broken, and in truth, neither could she. Can a role be so consuming that it permanently severs you from your real self? Fact Cancelletose, Faye Dunaway, banished after Mommy Dearest. In 1981's Mommy Dearest, Faye Dunaway portrayed Joan Crawford with terrifying intensity, shrieking, "No wire hangers," into pop culture infamy. But what was supposed to be a prestige biopic became her professional coffin. Dunaway dove deep into Crawford's darkness, transforming her voice, posture, even emotional rhythms. But audiences didn't see nuance. They saw camp. Critics mocked the film, calling it unintentionally hilarious. Dunaway's performance was exaggerated, they said. Too much, too cruel, too real. Afterward, the phone stopped ringing. Dunaway claimed studios began avoiding her. She was difficult, hysterical, a risk. In interviews, she refused to discuss the role, saying it nearly destroyed her. Was she punished for going too far, or for revealing something too true about a woman Hollywood once idolized? Fact tu blang, Bela Lugosi, Dracula's Eternal Curse. Bela Lugosi didn't just play Dracula, he became Dracula in the eyes of the world, and tragically, in his own. After the 1931 Universal classic, Lugosi was instantly iconic. His Hungarian accent, his piercing stare, the flowing cape all became the blueprint for cinematic vampires. But while the world celebrated, Lugosi's career began to decay. He was typecast in horror, only horror. Studios refused to see him as anything else. He turned down Frankenstein, hoping for more range. It never came. Financial ruin followed. Drug dependency soon after. He became addicted to morphine and methadone, reportedly to cope with chronic pain, but some say it was to numb the psychological isolation. In his final years, he lived in poverty, appearing in low-budget horror films, a ghost of his former self, still in a cape. Was it fame, or a slow-motion funeral wrapped in celluloid? Fact hashite, George Reeves, the man who couldn't stop being Superman. To millions of children in the 1,950 seconds, George Reeves was Superman. Strong, virtuous, bulletproof, but behind the cape, he was anything but invincible. Reeves had ambitions far beyond the Man of Steel. He wanted serious drama, film noir, even Shakespeare. But casting directors scoffed. "You're Superman," they'd say. "You can't be Hamlet." Studios feared confusing audiences. Producers worried kids wouldn't separate fiction from reality. So Reeves was stuck flying wires, cheesy dialogue, and a paycheck that felt more like a cage. His personal life unraveled. He drank heavily. He resented the public image he couldn't escape. In 1959, he was found dead from a gunshot wound, ruled a suicide. Though conspiracy theories linger, some say he was murdered. Others believe he simply couldn't live outside the tights. Was George Reeves a victim of fame, or of a world that refused to let him be human? Fact Joe, Tippi Hedren, Hitchcock's beautiful prisoner. Alfred Hitchcock discovered Tippi Hedren and made her a star in The Birds, 1963. But the cost of that stardom was a cage lined with obsession, manipulation, and trauma. During filming, Hedren was told mechanical birds would be used for a terrifying attack scene. Instead, real birds were hurled at her for 5 straight days. She was scratched, bitten, and mentally shattered. But the horror didn't stop on set. Hitchcock became possessive, controlling her wardrobe, isolating her on set, even reportedly sabotaging her career when she refused his advances. Though she delivered powerful performances, Hedren's momentum vanished. She later said, "Hitchcock ruined my career, but not my life." Still, her on-screen fear was real, too real. Was it direction? Or something far more disturbing masquerading as art? Fact Hasson 0, Janet Leigh, Forever the Woman in the Shower. One scene, 45 seconds. That's all it took for Janet Leigh to become immortal and imprisoned. In Psycho 1960, Leigh's infamous shower scene redefined horror. Her screams, her terror, her helplessness etched into cinema forever. But while audiences praised Hitchcock's genius, Leigh was left carrying the consequences. For decades, people only associated her with that one moment. Studios stopped casting her in romantic or comedic roles. Fans sent her letters begging her to scream again. She was no longer an actress. She was an archetype. Privately, she revealed she never took showers again. The trauma of filming with real knives, cold water, and dozens of takes left her shaken. But worse, she never escaped the narrative. Even in death, most headlines read, "Psycho star Janet Leigh dead." Can a single scene become so iconic it consumes everything else you are? Fact has so known. Linda Lovelace, a role that destroyed a life. In 1972, Deep Throat made Linda Lovelace a household name, but not by choice. Marketed as a symbol of sexual revolution, the film was a cultural sensation. But years later, Lovelace revealed a chilling truth. She had been abused, coerced, and trafficked into the role by her husband. What the world saw as performance was, in her words, a filmed rape. She spent the rest of her life trying to reclaim her name, speaking out against the industry, writing memoirs, campaigning against pornography. But no matter how loud her voice became, the world only remembered her as that woman from that film. Even her tombstone makes no mention of her real name, just her stage identity. Is it still a performance when the person on screen had no choice? Fact Hosono, Mercedes McCambridge, the voice that possessed her. You never see her face in The Exorcist, but Mercedes McCambridge's voice, the guttural, demonic rasp of the devil itself, haunted millions, and in the end, it haunted her too. To create the voice of the demon, McCambridge underwent torturous methods: chain, smoking, consuming raw eggs, and tying herself to a chair for physical realism. But what truly darkened the experience was the studio's betrayal. They left her name off the credits, wanting the public to believe Linda Blair did it all. McCambridge fought for recognition and won, but the damage lingered. Her personal life collapsed. Her son committed murder-suicide. Her own grip on reality wavered. She once said the demon voice was a place I visited and sometimes couldn't leave behind. What happens when the darkness you play decides to stay? Fact Chasseur, Jennifer Jason Leigh, drowning in Georgia. In Georgia, 1995, Jennifer Jason Leigh gave what many critics called the performance of a lifetime. But behind the critical acclaim was a spiral into emotional collapse. Leigh played a struggling musician drowning in the shadow of her more successful sister, a role written by her own mother. The emotional exposure was raw, devastating, and unrelenting. Leigh lost weight. She isolated. She reportedly stayed in character for weeks on end. One crew member recalled she wouldn't speak to anyone unless spoken to in character. When filming wrapped, Leigh didn't return to normal. She couldn't. Friends described her as withdrawn, disassociated. She said later in interviews that Georgia left her with nothing to hold on to. How deep should an actor go for a role, and who pulls them back when it becomes too real? Fact Chasseur, Mia Farrow, Rosemary's Real Nightmare. In Rosemary's Baby, 1968, Mia Farrow played a woman whose body is violated, her trust shattered, her child stolen by a cult. And while the horror was scripted, the trauma wasn't. During production, Farrow's real-life marriage to Frank Sinatra was crumbling. He served her divorce papers on set. Director Roman Polanski pushed her into increasingly isolating takes, encouraging paranoia, even filming her on the street without permits, forcing genuine fear. And the public? They adored her performance, but fixated on her appearance. She was too thin, too quiet, too weird. Years later, Farrow admitted she never fully recovered from the experience emotionally or physically. She didn't just act like a woman being gaslit. She became one. What if the horror wasn't the story, but how it was made? Fact Hasson 5, Tony Perkins, The Return of Norman, again and again. Yes, again, Anthony Perkins, because unlike most actors, he didn't just become trapped in a role. He returned to it willingly 3 more times. After the original Psycho, Perkins resisted the idea of reprising Norman Bates, but as offers dried up and his own identity blurred with the character, he eventually returned in Psycho 2, 3, and IV. By then, the line between actor and icon was hopelessly tangled. He began directing Norman, writing for Norman, defending Norman's motivations in interviews. Privately, Perkins struggled with his sexuality, with health issues, with the quiet disintegration of his legacy. To many, he wasn't even a real actor anymore, just a museum piece playing a ghost of himself. Can you become so famous for one role that you have no choice but to live inside it? Fact Hashonix, Mark Hamill, the curse of the farm boy savior. To the world, he'll always be Luke Skywalker, the galaxy's golden hero. But for Mark Hamill, Star Wars was both a dream and a creative straitjacket. After A New Hope, Hamill hoped to branch out into serious drama and theater. He trained in Shakespeare, voiced animated villains, and performed off-Broadway. But no matter where he went, casting directors would raise an eyebrow. You mean the space guy? He was too iconic, too clean, cut, too Luke. Even when he delivered brilliant performances, studios hesitated. Hamill once admitted, "Fame can freeze you in time." In later years, he found redemption in voice acting, becoming the Joker for a new generation. But on screen, he remained forever chained to Tatooine. What happens when the audience refuses to see you grow? Fact Hasson 7. Peter Lorre, trapped by a murderer's whispers. Before he was Hollywood's go-to villain, Peter Lorre played Beckert, a child killer hunted by criminals in Fritz Lang's M. 1931. It was a performance so eerie, so humanly depraved, that it made him a legend overnight. But the role followed him like a curse. German audiences spat at him in the streets. Producers offered only roles for addicts, creeps, or killers. When he fled Nazi Germany and arrived in Hollywood, the pattern continued. From Mad Love to The Maltese Falcon, Lorre became the embodiment of the untrustworthy outsider, whispered, hunched, morally compromised. He longed to play comedy or romance, but the industry didn't care. He had spoken softly once as a murderer, and no one could unhear it. Can the voice that made you famous be the one that silences every other? Fact Hasson 8. Betsy Palmer, the role that killed her reputation. Betsy Palmer was a respected stage and television actress until 1980, when she took a role she thought no one would see. Pamela Voorhees, the deranged mother and killer, in Friday the 13th. She only took the role for a paycheck. Her car had broken down. But the film exploded. Suddenly, Palmer was the face of maternal madness. Her performance was praised, but the content horrified longtime fans. She was disinvited from talk shows. Producers stopped calling. They thought I'd gone insane, she later said. While the horror world revered her, mainstream Hollywood shunned her. She embraced the horror community eventually, but always carried the sting. One job, one performance had overwritten her entire resume. What if the role you regret is the only one they'll remember? Fact Hassonanine, Max Schreck, the vampire that was too real. In Nosferatu 1922, Max Schreck portrayed Count Orlok with such eerie authenticity that rumors began almost immediately. Was he an actual vampire? The urban legend took hold not just because of his grotesque appearance and jerky movements, but because so little was known about Schreck himself. He rarely gave interviews. He avoided public appearances. His name, literally meaning terror in German, didn't help. Even decades later, the 2000 film Shadow of the Vampire fictionalized the idea that Schreck had actually been a creature of the night. What's chilling is that Nosferatu wasn't a one-time fluke. Schreck spent much of his career in roles that emphasized deformity, monstrosity, or madness. He became a symbol not of horror as genre, but horror as myth. And the man beneath the prosthetics? Lost to history. What if the performance is so convincing? No one cares who you really are. Fact #20 Heather Donahue, buried by Blair Witch. In 1999, the Blair Witch Project redefined horror with its realism. And for Heather Donahue, it redefined and ruined her life. The film blurred fact and fiction so effectively that audiences believed it was real. Heather, who used her real name in the film, received actual condolences from strangers who thought she had died. Agents wouldn't represent her. Casting directors worried she couldn't break character. Even when she shaved her head and tried to reinvent herself, the label stuck, Blair Witch Girl. Years later, she left acting entirely, changed her name, and became a medical cannabis grower. In her memoir, she wrote, "I dropped my name because it felt like my name had been eaten alive by a movie. What if you played yourself and the world still refused to let you live?" Bonus fact, Heath Ledger, a role that crossed the line. When Heath Ledger was cast as the Joker in The Dark Knight, 2008, skepticism ran high. By the time the film was released, the world stood in stunned silence and then applause. His performance was otherworldly, unhinged, iconic, and posthumous. Ledger threw himself into the role with ferocity. He locked himself in a hotel room for weeks, kept a journal as the Joker, practiced the voice until it felt like it wasn't his anymore. He called the process liberating. But friends saw warning signs: insomnia, isolation, obsessive behavior. By the time filming wrapped, Ledger was visibly drained. He died of an accidental overdose months before the film's release. Some blamed the role, others said it was coincidence. But when his journal was found filled with drawings, chaotic handwriting, and a final scrawled phrase, "Bye-bye," the myth solidified. He hadn't just played the Joker, he became him. Whether that's fair or comforting is still debated. So we ask, was this the price of genius, or a system that rewards descent into madness as long as the footage rolls? Hollywood gave them fame, immortality, applause echoing across generations. But behind the curtain, many of these stars paid a price. No audience ever saw one role, one performance, that rewrote everything they were and everything they could be. Some escaped, most didn't. Because in the end, what's more terrifying? The darkness a character must inhabit, or the silence that greets them when the role is over? Which of these stories left the deepest mark on you, and which actors do you believe never truly came back? Let the curtain fall, but the questions remain. We're listening in the comments.